Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We're going to finish up with London Prodigal today, and we're going to go out on a monologue from Sir Lancelot Spurcock in Act 1, Scene 13. So up until this point, well, at least in this scene, Matthew is extremely down on his luck. Remember, he had spurned his wife Luce, who is living in disguise as a Dutch chambermaid for Francis, who married Tom Civet. And Greenshield and Oliver were looking for her and all this sort of stuff, but Matthew has nothing. He has no friends, he has no money, he has no nothing. So earlier in this scene, or a couple of scenes ago, he actually tried to rob his sister-in-law, but that didn't work, but she covered for him. And earlier in this scene, he tried to collect on old debts, but the money was already gone. He tried to call in all sorts of favors. Eventually, he started just begging random people for help, and some of them helped him. So he's like, actually, this whole being a beggar thing might not be a bad idea. And then Luce came outside and she started talking to him and she's like, so tell me about your wife. And he's like, oh, she's dead. It's so sad. And she's like, well, did you treat her well? And he's like, oh, I treated her better than any husband has ever treated a wife. And of course, this is Luce that he's talking to, his actual wife, who he spurned and abandoned. But she goes back inside to take care of some things, and Spurcock comes walking by and sees Matthew, and he's like, oh, wonderful. Is this lewd villain here? Oh, you cheating rogue. You cut-purse coney-catcher. What ditch, you villain, is my daughter's grave? A cozening rascal that must make a will, take on him that strict habit, vary that. When he should turn to angel, a dying grace, I'll father-in-law you, sir, I'll make a will. Speak, villain, where's my daughter? Poisoned, I warrant you, or knocked to the head, and to abuse good Master Weathercock with his forged will, and Master Weathercock to make my grounded resolution then to abuse the Devonshire gentleman. Go, away with him to prison. So Spurcock wants nothing to do with Matthew. He is over Matthew. He's calling him a villain. He calls him a villain 2 or 3 times in this monologue. And he's like, I want nothing to do with you, because he's still under the impression or working on the theory that Matthew killed Luce. So he's furious. He's like, where is my daughter? Give her back to me. You're a terrible person. You did that whole thing with a fake will. You're not worth anything. Somebody arrest him and take him away. And Matthew was like, wait, what? But then Civet and Francis and Oliver and Greenshield and Uncle Flowerdale and Delia enter, and Spurcock is like, take him away to prison if he can't tell us where my daughter is. But Matthew keeps maintaining his innocence. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Luce comes out, but she's still in disguise as the Dutch maid, and she wants to know what's going on. And she's like, oh, but this fine gentleman, Matthew, professed his love for me. And there's a little bit of back and forth there. And then Luce reveals herself to be Luce, and she does so first by saying something to her dad, and she takes off her headscarf or whatever while she's looking at her dad, and she's like, I know that I should be asking for your forgiveness, but really it's him that I'm going to obey and bow to. And she kneels in front of Matthew, which of course makes Spurcock really angry. And Matthew turns away from Luce, and she's like, wait a second, what's wrong with me? And she does make a couple what we would consider now racial slurs, but at the time that things were different. I'm not going to repeat them. But she's like, what's so wrong with me? I'm totally lovable. And Matthew replies that he's so ashamed by the way that he has treated at her and the way that he has acted. And the men that are there don't buy it, but Luce reiterates that she stands by him, and he reiterates that he's ready to be a changed man. And because of this change in his attitude, Oliver gives him some money. And then Greenshield gives Luce this beautiful diamond. And then Oliver gives Luce some more money. And then Uncle says that if Matthew continues to be a decent person, he'll name Matthew as his heir. But Spurcock is like, he's never getting nothing from me because that guy killed his own dad. At which point old Flowerdale, who's still in disguise as Christopher the servant, is like, I don't think that that's true. And he gives Matthew some money. And then Francis gives Luce her fan, and Tom Civet promises to buy Francis another one, and Weathercock joins in and gives Luce some money. But Spurcock still isn't going to budge until old Flowerdale's like, well, what was her dowry? And he's like, oh, it was £1,000 or whatever. And old Flowerdale's like, I can give you 3 times that if you just give Matthew a break. And Spurcock is like, wait a second, but I thought you were his serving man. And old Flowerdale's like, haha, ta-da, I'm actually his dad. And Matthew is like, oh my God, I thought you were dead and you're not. I'm so ashamed. I'm so sorry for behaving so badly. But old Flowerdale forgives him, and he tells everybody that he was just doing this whole disguise thing so that he could keep an eye on Matthew. But he's proud of the changes that Matthew has now decided to make. And they all start to go into dinner, but then Oliver's like, hang on a second, I was promised a wife. And Greenshield is like, yeah, kind of, sort of, me too. And Spurcock is like, well, there's Delia, and whichever one of you she wants, she can have. And she looks at Oliver and she's like, I'm yours. And he's like, great, let's get married. And she's like, no. I meant I'm your friend, I'm your confidant, I'm your whatever, but I'm never getting married. I don't want to be a wife. I don't want to be a mother. My life is supposed to be a life of solitude. And Oliver's like, you know what? I'm going to be a bachelor then too. And then everybody decides that they're going to go in and have dinner. And that's the end of the play. So, London Prodigal. It was a comedy, and I feel like it started out really strong in terms of comedic aspects, and then it did get really dark, and then it came back to everything getting wrapped up in a neat little bow, sort of the way that a comedy is supposed to do. And I wouldn't have thought of this had I not just seen Patrick Page's All the Devils Are Here, but he was talking about the evolution of Shakespeare's villains, and Matthew doesn't really fit with the rest of Shakespeare's villains, which is why I think maybe this one wasn't written by Shakespeare. There was plenty of evidence to say that maybe this was, but a lot of scholars say, like, because of word choice and because of themes and all that sort of thing, that maybe it wasn't. And it might, for me, come down to Matthew. Like, there's no real good reason for Matthew to be the liar and the cheat and the gambler and all that stuff that he is, and then some bad stuff happens and he turns himself around. But what Shakespeare gave to villains was a sense of conscience and a sense of backstory and all of that, which Matthew doesn't really have. And that's not to say that this is a bad play. It's a cute little play, and it gets the point across. You know, Matthew still gets to serve the function of being the vice, of being the bad guy that the others can rally against until he turns a new leaf and turns into a good guy. Now, there might be a little bit of difficulty for a person in this day and age to play Matthew and to be able to make that change of heart believable, but I think that some of that goes to Matthew actually getting to the point of wanting to kill himself because he has nothing left, but then seeing the kindness in the strangers around him and getting redeemed and loose and all of that sort of thing. It would be a difficult role to play by today's standards, but back then it probably was just good fun to see a man that wants to kill himself because he has nothing left. Luce, I think, is an interesting character in the way that she didn't want to marry him in the first place, but then stays so fiercely loyal once they are married. And I also think that it's interesting to have Delia, who doesn't want to get married at all, and everybody's okay with that. Also put in contrast with Francis and Civet, who are maybe the best comic relief in this play with some of the little asides that they have and things like that. So was this one written by Shakespeare? Maybe, but probably not. It's maybe a little bit simpler than the plays that he would have been writing about the time period that this one was written. But it's a cute little read. I'd like to see a production of it. I would love to hear your thoughts on it, so please leave those in the comments. And tomorrow we're going to start in on a brand new play. So I'll see you then for that. Mwah.